Hey, what's up, nerds? Your boy is back up in this shit. Shattered Worlds, Day 1, Book 4, Boarding the Horus. Chapter 1. Horus was an impressive vessel. Burnished bronze with green-tinted windows, it projected an image of combined cruelty and sophistication. The cannons were barely disguised. The paint along their housings cracked and rippled through consistent use. The engines gleamed with newly applied chrome, as if the captain had ordered it specifically for the trip. Fuel and water lines snaked around the vessel, no doubt preparing it for takeoff. The entry hatch lay open, 3 great triangular panels, each with their own staircase, so the ship could dock in 3 different configurations. Sophra smiled at the presence of an actual red carpet running the length of the hatch. Captain Thraxis certainly had a flair for the dramatic. I'm sorry, is my chair squeaking really bad? I don't know what's going on. This is my grandparents' chair. It's ancient. I treated it badly since they died. They were always like tinkering, making everything perfect because they were from the Depression. I guess I might be one of those people after this. Captain Thraxis certainly had a flair for the dramatic. Not exactly hiding his presence, this captain, Grundle growled. He was limping noticeably, his left arm still bandaged and wrapped to his side. Aeana stood at a distance and studied the area. It was a small supplemental shipyard, one designed one designed to accommodate smaller vessels, mostly those ferrying dignitaries and other important personages. A priest of the Majoran faith was weaving some kind of spell over a small ferry, presumably to grant the inhabitants safe passage. She wondered if such a spell could be effective. Space was so vast, its forces so monumental, it was hard to conceive of anything strong enough to protect against it. One of the foremen walked up to the group and asked to check the manifest. The Gillamorian produced a packet of papers and stood still, looking bored as the foreman flipped through them. Aeana strained to hear as he inquired about the passengers. As best she could tell, the engineer was running through their various cover stories. A bribe was passed. That would come out of their travel expenses. She lamented the need for such things, but corruption was an integral part of life in the outer reaches. And in the end, what was a few hundred connels compared to the hundreds of thousands they were shelling out for this trip? A lot of money. Thousands. I'ma smoke some more weed. Yeah. Excuse me. Terrible noises. Here we go. Faline, show our guests to their staterooms. You will excuse me, Your Mercy. I have much to do yet before we launch. Aeana smiled and dipped her head. A strand of her wig's long brown hair fell in front of her face, no doubt giving her a coquettish air. Once again, she cursed herself for coming across as such a girl. She knew it was unnecessary to judge herself in this way, and yet her own body betrayed her. It brought up uncomfortable associations to her previous life before entering the goddess's service. Faline stalked down the dimly lit corridors of the ship, briefly pointing out each stateroom. Stateroom was a bit of a misnomer, however, as each room was tiny, with only room for a table, two chairs, and a bunk bed. The window was a vid screen, currently running a picture of a pastoral Calustrian landscape. Ayanna turned to thank the woman, but she'd marched on, Sophris and Grundle trailing after. The gunner was the kind of woman Ayanna had always had trouble with, social climbing women of questionable character and low birth. For some reason, they generally tended to dislike her. Ayanna viewed herself as one of a tribe of women committed to working with them no matter their circumstances. But unfortunately, there were some who seemed to prefer the attention of men over the friendship of their fellows. The woman's sashaying gait drove her nuts. Seriously, did she honestly think Sophris and Grundle would have any interest in that display? The group stopped at the end of the corridor and entered another stateroom. Faline followed the men inside, but not before turning to deliver an icy stare at Ayanna. What the fuck? She murmured to herself. There's no pleasing some people. Ayanna had met more than her share of such women back on Calustria. It was probably one of the reasons she'd joined the order in the first place. Better to be poor and respected than wealthy and reviled. She closed the stateroom door and slumped onto the bed, still wearing her workman's uniform. As she kicked off her shoes, she began to cry. You guys hear that weird bird? We got cool birds around here. Do you have bird feeders? I got a bunch. I got to refill them. I probably got to clean them because winter frozen. That was a sentence, right? All right. Boarding the Horus. Chapter 3. Grundle's joints ached and popped as he shuffled down the ship's main corridor toward the rear hall. How about that for a sentence? Grundle's joints ached and popped as he shuffled down the ship's main corridor toward the rear hall. He tried to push away the terrible memories of yesterday's carnage, but the sounds and smells of death beat at his mental walls. He reached the hall door and found it fixed open. This is unwise. I'll need to inform the captain. Safety is paramount aboard any vessel. As he nudged his way through the doorway, he saw a long table, a small kitchen and bar area, something approximating a dance floor, a few entertainment machines against one wall, an attached restroom, and an enormous set of windows looking out into the void. Standing dead center before them was Ayanna, staring out the window at the rapidly receding asteroid. Ships traveled in and out of hyperspace, docking and disembarking in random intervals. In a minute or two, the Horus would be hurtling through space and time towards the last known position of Creel's vessel. Grundle walked across the room and stood beside her. As he approached, he felt her warmth radiate through his aching. As he approached, he felt her warmth radiate through his aching bones. He believed he would never tire of standing in her presence. She was as good a woman as his late sainted mother, and she was alive. A fair trade, one might say. And unlike anyone else on the ship, she understood his pain. Those were his people dead and maimed on that base, the closest thing to family he had left. He laid one massive hand gently upon her shoulder. Smiling thinly, Ayanna placed her palm against the window. She'd been crying. Like him, she must have been pondering what they were leaving behind. They would likely never see the citizens of Antares again. Friends, co-workers, random passerby on the street, patients, shopkeepers, police officers, all of them would become but distant memories in time. All, all of them would become but distant memories in time. It hurt to leave them, but they both knew it was the right thing to do. Their, their lives were in danger. Grundle only hoped that someone might be able to stop the secret Yafriti power grab and liberate the base's citizens. We will do what we can, my friend. That is all we can do. Grundle nodded his head, said a prayer for the dead, and squeezed Aeonna's shoulder. She turned into him and laid her head against his chest. Time slowed. Then it stopped. The rippling tendrils of energy that always accompanied hyperspace jumps filled their vision. And, just like that, it was as if they'd never been there at all. Okay. Okay. I don't know why I'm doing that. I I think it's short enough. I'm gonna do the next book too. All right. Book 5. Book 5. Taking Fire. 1. Sophris marveled at the power and sophistication of the Horus. Such intricate connections, such gargantuan engines. He followed the Gillamorian around the underdecks, touching everything, and taking in the care and precision of all those who'd had a hand in its construction. The Gillamorian had adapted much. His signature was everywhere Sophris looked. It was an it was an impressive achievement. The Gillamorian looked him over as if looking for a weakness in Sophris's armor, as if he himself were an elaborate organic machine. Do you speak? Sophris inquired. He knew the answer, of course, but sometimes he found it useful to play the innocent. The engineer nodded. His voice was low and slightly aggrieved. I do. I'm fascinated by your work. I'd love to know more about it. But first, tell me about you. How did you end up on this ship, in this profession? The Gillamorian paused, then responded. I came up back when space travel was common among my people. I was raised with dozens of young on one of the lesser colonies. Resources were scarce, so a bunch of us decided to leave and pursue adventure. We were tasked with designing new habitats for our people, but we've made little progress in that area. It seems most of us are simply toiling in ordinary jobs without direction. My hope is that one day the conclave will reform and our experts and my hope is that one day the conclave will reform and our experiments at unification will be funded once again. There was a long, awkward silence. Unification. Sophris had heard that Gillamorian still held to the idea, but he'd never heard it spoken aloud. Among his own people, the notion had long ago been discarded as an impossibility. But is it not true that our races are too long divided? Without the ability to mate, how could we possibly return to unity? The Gillamorian shrugged. It's just an idea. Science has yet to find the answers. Perhaps the Lunari are further along. That was an intriguing notion. The Lunari, with their enormous intellects and nigh emotionless drives, had sought for millennia to restore the ancient technologies. Much was known of their failed experiments, the so-called undesirables, with all their nasty shapes and appetites, were legendary. Some said there was an entire planet devoted to their race, some said there was an entire planet devoted to their care. Many a Mistral child had lain awake at night, imagining their terror. Many a Mistral child had lain awake at night, imagining their terrifying forms, Sophros included. Just then, the entire deck shook. Dust flew down from a broken duct, coating both men. The engineer hunkered down, hand touching the floor as if glued there. Sophros, on the other hand, flew headlong down the chamber in a crazy somersault motion. As he drifted out of phase, the ship righted itself. He could hear the pounding of heavy equipment slamming back down to the deck. He hit the ground, hard. Red lights flashed. The engineer ran past and over Sophros. His arm was up to his mouth, and he was shouting. Sophros slumped over onto his stomach and propped himself up. The ship lurched again, shuddering violently. He prayed the gravity would hold. There were a great many pointy things up there above the ceiling tiles. All hands! Battle stations! The captain's voice was like a saber slashing through Sophros's ears. His normally jocular voice had been converted to a mighty martial roar. No! I know this one's a little longer, but there's just 2 chapters in this one book, so. I'm kind of like Stephen King. My sizes of my chapters and shit get all small and big, big and small. I don't know. Taking Fire, Chapter 2. What's happening? Ayana hurtled down the corridor to the bridge, leaping 3 stairs with each step, lugging herself to the top by the railings. By the time she reached the upper landing, she was dripping with sweat. Faline was locked in the gunner position, black Virtua helmet down, vid screens rotating around her as she scanned the space around the ship. Ayana winced each time the great gun fired, a vast orange blur blazing across the screens toward a barely visible green target. Almost did that perfectly. Strap in and stay calm, Captain Thraxus shouted, twisting around the high back of the chair. Ayana could see the fear in his eyes, yet behind it she could also see the excitement of a child. He loves this. She heaved herself into the safety seat, praying silently for their protection. The ship yawed and rolled, gravity compensators working double time. She could feel her feet lifting from the ground as the computer made a billion split-second calculations. What a ship! What handling! What power! If they'd known what they were up against, would their attackers have dared? Of course, she knew nothing of their attackers. Perhaps they were as skilled as the captain. Perhaps there were dozens of them. She sighed. Was this to be their end? Grundle's massive arm lunged over the landing. She noticed he was partially armored. Perhaps he was anticipating a boarding party? His unvisored eye landed on hers. A look passed between them. It seemed to say, "We're in this together." Then he was lumbering into his own safety seat. It was ridiculously undersized for even the slightest Vorak, let alone the largest man she had ever seen. She whispered a blessing and gave Grundle an appreciative gesture with her free hand. A trio of purplish comets soared across the ship's main view screen. Hmm. A trio of purplish comets soared across the ship's main view screen, vibrating the ship and shearing off the top few layers of the energy shield. Phaline swung the cannon wide to the left. Aeana winced as Thraxus pulled a tart. Aeana winced as Thraxus pulled a tight turn. Aeana winced as Thraxus pulled a tight turn, rolling the ship hard to the right. 3 more chunks and the cannon shots were away. The targeted ship spun into a tumbling maneuver, shining with the reflected light of the bolt across its wings. Then it dropped right into Thraxus's trap, 2 pulsating orbs radiating a wide circle of crackling green energy. The ship got halfway through the circle, and then, with a spark, it went dark. "Captain, I can't see it." Numeris's tone was somewhere between frantic and jubilant. The captain threw off his visor and pounded the dashboard. "Joss, you beautiful bastard!" Laughing, he pulled the Horus within a kilometer of the disabled vessel and trained the lights on it. "Portillion! Bridge! Now!" The captain smiled at Aeana. His teeth were whiter than porcelain. His eyes glowed with self-satisfied pride. Once again, Aeana cursed her unwanted femininity and her insufficient shame. She mouthed the words, "Blessed be you." Captain Thraxus appeared to understand, nodding to seal their unspoken bond. Daughters of Mercy rarely extended such gestures, particularly with strangers. She could tell that the captain was knowledgeable of that tendency as a flush met his cheeks. "Ahem," said a youthful male voice. The bridge fell silent. All eyes looked to the landing, where a very well-dressed young man stood staff straight. He coughed into his fist. The captain turned at the sound and narrowed his eyes. "Portillion, methinks you'd better explain what the hell this is about." Uh, all right. Cool. All right, come back next time for Revelations. Portillion de Vere told a tale of sorcery, close quarters combat, treachery, and the acquisition of a very special object. I'm not going to do it like that. This is stupid. I'm sorry. I'm going to go. Love you. Bye.